Our guest today is John Penrose, the former Conservative MP for Weston-super-Mare, which he represented from 2005 until the last general election, and who I got to know very well when I was at the IEA. During his time as an MP, he had several ministerial roles, including Lord Commissioner of the Treasury and Minister of State for Northern Ireland, but he was perhaps best known over that period for his prodigious work on generating and debating policy ideas within the Conservative Party and the wider Conservative family. So no surprise then, perhaps, that John's the chairman of the Conservative Policy Forum, which I want to dig into a little bit later. That's the forum that's created to ensure that the voice of party members is seen and heard by the powers that be. Also, and I suspect there'll be quite an overlap here between John's new organisation and PopCon, he has established the Centre for Small State Conservatives, which have created to collect ideas and arguments in favour of a strong but small government. Seems to me that in these wilderness years is the key time for the Conservative Party to build a completely new policy agenda from the ground up. So I'm really pleased to be joined by someone who seems ideally placed to influence that to a significant degree. John, it's great to see you. How the devil are you doing, sir?
Great to be here, Mark. Lovely to be back as the I hesitate to call us a band, but at least a duet talking about this stuff, and I'm looking forward to the next hour.
Great. Well, look, let's just start with a contemporary point. What do you make of the whole budget fiasco of recent days? You can touch on the content of the budget if you like as well, but also the sort of fallout between the Office for Budget Responsibility and the Treasury, which obviously has reached epic proportions in the last I don't know 100 hours or so, but seem to be a source of tension for many weeks. Richard Hughes, as I said, has quit. I mean, the whole thing has been a shambles, not just in terms of policy content, but in terms of this is no way whatsoever to construct a budget, is it?
Absolutely right. And there is a reason, a good reason, why historically this thing called budget purdah, where ministers and officials and everybody is supposed to be absolutely religiously stumm, like sort of Trappist monks, for weeks and weeks and weeks before the budget. It isn't just because they want to be mean to journalists, it's because actually it can move markets. It's the equivalent of insider trading, if you like. You can have all sorts of really negative or positive effects if this stuff leaks. And so I think that, I mean, two things. Firstly, head of the OBR just resigning. I'm not sure how serious. Well, leaking the entire document with 45 minutes to go is pretty serious. But actually, if you compare that to a studied and pretty torrential flow of leaks over the previous 3 weeks, I think that his stuff was at least very close to the actual moment itself, and wouldn't have made a large amount of difference in terms of time. His was obviously a very big, the scope of it was large. So I think that the government has probably got more of a problem now than it had before he went, because now that it's been established that for leaking you should go, and the government itself was leaking far more for far longer than the OBR, and they were doing it deliberately, whereas the OBR's does seem to have been an accident. I think that this is not finished at all. And I think if I was the Financial Conduct Authority, which is supposed to be preventing insider trading, et cetera, I'd be really worried and wanting to look very, very closely at the effect on the gilts market, for example. So I think it is. You're right. It is a complete mess. It's no way to run a whelk stall at all. And I think that it is probably going to carry on because they've just sort of dug a slightly deeper hole in the course of the last 24 hours.
That's really interesting. Of course, Mel Strider's written to the Financial Conduct
Yeah,
Authority, right?
right.
And and I think Nigel Farage or others have written to the ethics advice. Why on earth the Prime Minister needs an ethics advisor is beyond me. But nevertheless, there is one.
Actually, as someone who's observed, some prime ministers need them more than others, and it's quite often quite useful. So I'm
Okay,
more
all
of a
right.
fan than
Well,
you are.
oh dear, we might come back to that. This is a part of the blob you're going to defend. Okay. Um,
It's one
but
man,
the
not a quango, but yeah, okay.
but the I suppose if you say leaks, need to be stamped down on.
Yeah.
To what extent do you think the government should ever be able to like fly a few kites? Right. I mean that there's obviously an iterative process in building a government, in building a budget together. You're thinking about things. I mean, in this case, they clearly seriously considered jacking up the income tax basic rate by tuppence. To what extent does this need to be sort of all signed by the Official Secrets Act? Or to what extent is it bound to be the case that some journalist or rather, or some caucus of MPs need to be consulted about it? What would you think
Yeah.
if we put this in the budget? Seems to me
Yes.
it's pretty hard to keep it watertight, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a difference between leaks of stuff which journalists are given quite clearly to understand are being, are quite likely to be in, you know, as opposed to consultations ongoing, still several weeks to go, et cetera, et cetera. And you're right, those sort of consultations and discussions and modeling and all those other things, that's part of the normal, um, you warp and weft of creating a budget or creating any piece of legislation at all. So yeah, absolutely, that's okay. But there's a big difference between that and the FT or the Times or the Telegraph or whoever saying, sources close to the Chancellor have indicated that this is being, very likely to be in, or has already been signed off, which is what we
Mm-hmm.
got quite a lot of.
Well, uh, let's look at obviously they had this disaster of the leak. Albeit it looks like a piece of negligence rather
Yeah.
than any kind of criminal activity. I'm not suggesting that there was anything untoward other than negligence. Although I do love the story. There's no evidence. I found no grounds to back it up that it was all uploaded by some bureaucrat who was supposedly working on home from home, but was actually on a beach somewhere and failed to work out the time difference, and it should have been uploaded an hour later.
I'm
I'm
not,
sure that
I have no idea that's true, but I so
I'm
want
sure
it
it's
to
not
be.
true, but the worrying thing is it's plausible, right? The worrying
Indeed,
thing is
indeed
it's
so.
plausible, even if there's not a grain of truth to it. But
Yeah.
the OBR itself, so this was set up by Osborne, and the idea was that the government shouldn't mark its own homework, and that Gordon Brown in particular had been sort of guilty of cooking the books might be a bit of an exaggeration, but bending the data as far as possible and leaning on officials to bend that data. So we've had the OBR, but I mean, its record of forecasting is absolutely hopeless. In fact, in April this year, I launched three of my own forecasting models. I did do it on April the 1st as an April
Oh, I,
Fool.
I saw your tweet about it. It was good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep going. Sorry, yes,
So, you either, have a random number generator between 0 and 2 to one decimal point to calculate growth. That was one way that I forecast growth in the next 4 years. The other was just to point out that the OBR was always over optimistic. So just halve whatever they think the growth rate is, or double it if it's in negative territory. And my third one, which I really hope comes out as the winner, was to suggest that the number of goals scored in Premier League football matches is positive for the economy because it leads to people buying more beer to celebrate goals, buying replica football shirts. So we should find some algorithm which relies on the square root of goals scored in any given Premier League season to derive the growth rate. And I
Mm.
am going to keep a beady eye on it to see whether any of my three models prove to be more accurate than the OBR models. And my three models cost the taxpayer not a penny and about 30 minutes of my own time to set up. So what is the point in believing? And I'm really worried that the whole debate around this, we believe that the OBR is giving us some sort of science to the last decimal point. And it's to all intents and purposes guesswork that might prove to be no better than my guesswork on the 1st of April this year, right?
Yeah. So two points if I can make. The first one is going back to the recent resignation of the OBR's leader. Um, in principle, he's left because of the leak. In practice, though, we all know, don't we, that he's also left because he's guilty of telling the truth about what the OBR told Rachel Reeves and when they told it. And actually, the really, I think, tragic thing is that he was approved to tell the truth to the Treasury Select Committee. Incidentally, this isn't just some bloke writing a Freedom of Information Act request or anything like it. Well, that would be serious enough. This is proper submission to the Treasury Select Committee and signed off in principle by the Treasury itself. And then when it told a story which was inconvenient for the Treasury, they got massively, massively arsy about it and very, very cross with him. So it would, it's a thought experiment, but I just reckon that if that hadn't happened, or had yet to happen, his odds of surviving the leak unscathed and carrying on in his job would probably be a great deal higher than they turned out to be because his cards were already marked because they were upset about what he'd said. So that's point one. Point two about yeah, you are right, aren't you? The OBR's track record is shocking. Um, I think I think part of it as well is that part of it actually, oddly, is the fault of chancellors of all parties. Because what happened ever since Gordon Brown invented fiscal rules, and I mean, we used not to have fiscal rules, as you know, but Gordon Brown realised that he was a Labour chancellor and therefore he had a credibility problem. So he invented these fiscal rules to say, I am going to be ever so, careful with the nation's money. Um, and what's happened ever since then is that the day that Mark Littlewood becomes chancellor, what you discover, Mark, is two things when you walk in the door. One is that you've inherited your predecessors' fiscal rules, and the second is that they've spent all the money up to the limit of their fiscal rules, and so therefore, unless you're willing to cut spending, P.S. that is the thing which they should do, but they never do, or haven't until recently, then your only choice is to relax the fiscal rules. And so what the fiscal rules have become is there's this ratchet towards looser money.
Mhm.
And you and I both know, and all your PopCons viewers this evening will know, looser money increases the risks of all sorts of things, including inflation, and it's very, very bad for the economy if you get too close to it. And we've just had this ratchet where it's got looser and looser and looser and looser. And now where we are is that one of Rachel Reeves's um, uh, fiscal rules is she's going to reduce national debt 5 years from now. It can go up
Yeah.
and down in the meantime, but 5 years. Now, nobody, I mean, you can be some combination of Nostradamus and Svengali, and you cannot, nobody can possibly accurately forecast the national debt 5 years out from now. And so, gosh, what a surprise. The OBR's forecasting record, as the timescales have got more and more, stretched and absurd, has got worse and worse and worse. So, as it stands, therefore, their track record is shocking. Their credibility is very, very low. I do think that probably in future we do want to have something which is a great deal smaller, but which does just one thing in future, and that is to do the in-year stuff about saying, right, if are you balancing the current budget, for example, this year? Forget about what's happening in future ones. Are you balancing it this year? That is more of an accountancy than a forecasting job, if I can put it that way. It's closer to normal company accounts as well. And it does do the thing which the OBR was originally set up to do, which is to create a tripwire and a klaxon that goes off if a chancellor starts to overspend. And that is actually something that's worth happening and making sure that it's an independent assessment of that. But you could equally well have that done by the Office for National Statistics or somebody else like that,
Well, you just
or
contract it out to an accountancy
or,
firm.
or indeed to any ordinary auditing company, I'm sure. So I would keep that bit of it, but that's an organisation which is a great deal smaller than where we are now.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I mean that seems. I mean, what I'm worried about, maybe we can get onto this wider thing, is the OBR is one example of it. But we seem to be taking the politics out of politics in a large number of areas, so that questions of fiscal credibility or balanced budgets are no longer sort of issues to be of the cut and thrust over the dispatch box, or
Mhm.
ideological disagreements between two political parties. They're a matter of a goddamn spreadsheet that Richard Hughes accidentally leaks an hour before the Chancellor stands up. That's crazy. And in a whole range of other areas, it seems to me that we've taken the politics out of politics. Climate change policy, I think now is just beginning to become sort of back into the public arena of debate. But the sort of intention was to say, everybody's agreed on this. It's just a kind of technocratic expert matter to work out how we bring it about. Don't worry your little heads about it. There's no political controversy. So I guess, and you might want to tell us a bit about your new small state conservative initiative, and for everybody on the call, we've got nearly 100 of you already. We'll put a link to John's website in the chat. But I mean, we need to get back, don't we, to politicians being in charge of this and taking the rap for things if they go wrong, and the public taking a judgment on whether they trust those politicians or not. And if they don't, kick them out, rather than having this network of 400 or so quangos, of which the OBR is only one, who in very many ways seem to have the whip hand on day-to-day policy making, even if de jure Parliament, could close them down or hold them to account. On a practical basis, the OBR has huge influence over fiscal policy. Maybe that will disappear. The Sentencing Guidance Council, huge influence over sentencing policy. The Environment Agency, was not much point in having a department for the environment if you've got the Environment Agency, and it goes on and on and on, doesn't it? So tell us a bit about your small state conservative initiative. As I say, we've now put the link in the chat for those of you who haven't come across it yet. You can sign up on the website. I have done so today. And whether you think, to what extent you agree with the core PopCon analysis that we need this sort of massive governmental overhaul before a small state it could feasibly be delivered.
So I'd agree with that starting point. This is where I think the small state conservatives and PopCons probably overlap pretty heavily, certainly. The question is how we get there. And you're right, there's some of these quangos which are trying to pretend that what they're doing is not politically contentious and therefore shouldn't be part of, parliamentary debates or council debates or whatever it might be. And where that is wrong, then it's the wrong thing to put into a quango, right? I mean, that it has to be a part of the democratic process. There are, of course, lots of things which we don't want politicians intervening and meddling and fiddling with. As Ronald Reagan said, the nine scariest words in the English language are "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." And so, if you want to enforce a contract, you don't want a minister doing it. You want a court to do that. Yeah, and to that extent, a court is a quango, but it is something which is absolutely fair dues to sort of keep at arm's length from political decision making. But wherever it's not fair dues, and climate change is a really good example where there was a settled in principle agreement, and which is now unraveling and has unraveled quite dramatically. You can't have a quango trying to do that. It puts the quango officials in an impossible position for a start because they end up sort of politically exposed and they shouldn't be. The whole point about having a professional independent civil service is that they are not taking political decisions and you're asking them to. So you're actually it's unfair on them and their jobs descriptions for a start, but also it just doesn't pass the sniff test. So I'm completely with you there. The other bit which I'd also add to your analysis is where you need proper, well, all these quangos need proper political oversight. I don't think that our political oversight mechanisms work. If you want to have something which is supposed to be grinding out incremental 0.5% improvements in efficiency in environmental regulation or water company regulation or energy company regulation, having Ofgem or Ofwat or the Environment Agency reporting to a select committee is just a really crap way of delivering that kind of stuff because politicians are never going to be interested in the nerdy detail about how you've managed to improve the efficiency of leak detection or whatever it might be. So I think that we've got to get a great deal. I think actually, funny enough, we can probably borrow, and I'm sort of, you won't hear me say this very often, but I think we can probably borrow a leaf out of Tony Blair's book on this. Because when he set up the Academy Schools initiative, which we then carried on with and expanded, it's one of the things that I think we did well over the course of our 15 years or so in power. What he did was he said, I'm going to have, in this case, Ofsted going around and coming up with really simple judgments. There's lots of detail behind them. But if I'm a parent, I know if my school is excellent or outstanding or good or whatever. And that really made a difference. It meant that people did not want to send their children to schools that were not well graded. And it meant that teachers couldn't carry on being rubbish indefinitely because there were consequences and people intervened and school leaderships were changed, etc., etc. I think that we've got to start doing that for the political oversight so that you have a way of having an independent view on this stuff to say this regulator, this quango is failing miserably and change needs to happen. That means that then the politicians can't ignore it. And
That's
that then
interesting.
strengthens the way that that you get political accountability to work. Because without that, it can persist. Poor performance, low
Yeah.
productivity. The problem with public sector productivity, it's been going sideways for decades now, and that's because nobody is terribly interested in the nitty gritty, in political eyes, quite boring, but absolutely essential and vital bits about grinding out a 0.5% improvement every year and how you detect leaks in the water pipes or whatever it might be.
Okay, that's interesting, but and I may be playing devil's advocate here to some extent, but let me just challenge you a bit on that. So if you take Ofsted, right?
Yeah.
Do you think Ofsted works as well for schools as TripAdvisor does for hotels? Because I would look at TripAdvisor. I don't have the bloody Ministry for bloody tourism setting up some quango to go round and tell me which hotels are good or bad. You look through them, you look at the reviews, you look at it on the website. Uh, I mean, why can't schools be regulated in the same way? And it almost matters less for schools because a good number of parents have no bloody choice anyway. I mean, at least I get to choose which hotel I go to. The state prescribes which school I would have to send my children to incredibly strictly. So, I mean, at that point, you haven't got I mean, there is a degree of parental choice. There is a degree, but not the same that you'd have in an open market. And
Mm.
generally
So,
speaking, the quality of the schooling is something parents take extremely seriously. They're the
and rightly so.
customers. Get them to
Yeah.
rate the schools.
So I'd make a couple of points about that. I mean, firstly, I think that there is an argument for making sure there's a great deal more parental choice around school choice than taking what they're given by the local
Hmm.
council. But that's a separate and bigger, but I think quite fundamental question. Yeah. But equally, if I mean, I'm not a teacher. I don't know if you are, if you've ever done any teaching, Mark, but I can't, if I walk into a school and do what most parents do and stand in the back of the class for 5 minutes, and they do that for 4 or 5 classes, and they watch pupils in the playground and in the corridors to see if they're running. Um, I can't tell the details about whether or not a school is good or bad from that. I can tell if the outcomes, the exam results are good, but the exam results are only part of what I'm sending my child to school for. I want them to learn behaviour and stuff like that as well. But also the exam results can be fudged if it's just a highly selected school that's giving a crap education. They can still get quite good exam results compared to a school that has less good intake and does more.
Yeah.
So I think that the benefit of having something like Ofsted is it gives citizens, parents in this case, the information they need to make an informed decision. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You absolutely have to have parents making those decisions. That's the core and the power of what Blair originally did and we carried on with. Now, just think, why can't we start doing that for many more other quangos and regulators as well? Equip them so that people can make informed decisions, and either the customers, in this case parents, or alternatively, if it's a regulator itself, I want to have Ofgem assessed against a proper set of, what outcomes are you trying to achieve, Ofgem? Get an independent auditor. It doesn't have to be a quango. It can be one of the accountancy firms, as far as I'm concerned. Get an independent auditor to look at whether or not they've done those outcomes, and then you and I, as customers of Ofgem, because we're not getting energy from them, but we are living in the world which they have created in our energy bills, and more particularly our elected representatives can start hopping up and down and saying, actually, do you know what? We employed them to do 4 things, and they've done one, and that's it. Well,
Hmm.
come on then, Jonathan, who's the chief executive of Ofgem and a very nice bloke. Can you please explain yourself and what you're going to do to fix it? So I think that thing about an informed decision and something which politicians can get their teeth into and can't ignore, which strengthens the political accountability process, is what we're missing in an awful lot of cases as well.
But let's take your sort of, I appreciate, because the state's so massively and hugely large, there's an incredible amount of technical detail. It's a fair point on teaching that, a layman might not be able to spot these things, and that would apply to other areas. But let's take another example you gave, which was, water leakage and, how you might, be able to, dial it in a slightly positive direction in terms of stopping leakage. I mean, I would have thought that is of considerable interest to the Environment Secretary or the Minister for Water or whatever it might be. Let's put aside the argument about to what extent this should be a state competence as opposed to a private sector competence. But let's just assume, for the sake of argument, it's a public sector.
Given where we are,
given where we
that's
are.
what it is.
But I'm not sure I agree with you. That whilst if I was the Secretary of State for Water, whilst I might not understand all these detection mechanisms for picking up leaks, I'd be very interested in it, and I think I'd want down the corridor, first left, first right, in room 116, are my water leakage experts, and these will all be a bunch of boffins who are working on all of these things, and working out exactly how much polyfiller you need to put in a particular place to plug the gap or whatever it is. And I won't have
never to get you to do my plumbing, Mark.
but I would want the Secretary of State to be a generalist and to walk down the corridor, take the first left, take the first right, walk in and say, I've just seen this report saying that leakage has bloody well doubled over the last 25 years. What the hell is going on? And what are your ideas to fix it? Please explain them to me, rather than the situation we have at the moment. That's why, contrary to my natural free market instincts, I'm actually advocating for a program of some degree of nationalisation, right? In that I want the minister
Words I never thought I'd hear you say, Mark.
I want, if it's going to be a state-run thing, I want the minister to be in control. So if the minister for HS2 considers it a requirement of the HS2 railway line, something I would not have advocated building at all, but nevertheless, the minister decides we're going to build it, and the minister and the government decides that what it really needs is a bat tunnel built over it at one particular point, which on the financial analysis I have seen would cost £500,000 for each bat saved. I mean, this is quite an extraordinary measurement compared to what we do for spending on quality adjusted life years for humans. I would then expect the minister to say, this is nuts. Bats aren't worth that amount of money. I'm not going to go to the dispatch box at the House of Commons and justify this. Scrap the bat tunnel, right? Now, there's a separate argument, in my view, about whether the government should be involved in rail at all, or, these grandiose infrastructure projects.
Totally
but if it is a public sector thing, I want these powers from these sort of quangos to be under the command of and able to be influenced by the relevant minister. And Richard Watkins asks, and I don't know if you're aware of David Starkey's sort of hypothesis on this, which has led to the Great Repeal Bill idea, John. But Richard Watkins asks, the Starkey thesis says that the New Labour left behind a legal and administrative framework that makes it very hard to govern from the right. This idea should surely be seized upon by Tories as a reason why they didn't achieve all they hoped for in power. Should Kemi and co be making much more of this? I.e., we're not liberal or incompetent, we're just hampered by the traps New Labour left for us and that we didn't clear out of the way over those 14 years. Do you think that's the basis of a Conservative revival? Because that's the conclusion that I've sort of come to, with the disappointment, often with you and I on almost exactly the same side on a whole range of policy issues, that through 14 years of Conservative government, I could win the argument, I could have leading Conservative MPs like you on my side, and nothing happened. It was like trying to put a three-pronged plug into a two-pronged socket, right? Something was just awry. That winning the argument and persuading everybody it would be a good idea was not enough to make it happen under 14 bloody years of the Conservatives in office.
Welcome to my frustrated years. Exactly so. So look, there's a lot there. Let me just pick out a couple of really important things. Firstly, yes, absolutely, a Great Repeal Bill, absolutely essential. Yeah, and there's a whole range of things which we need to stop doing or do less often or do less frequently, less expensively. The problem with a Great Repeal Bill isn't that it isn't a good idea. The problem is it isn't going to be enough. Yeah, because even when you have stopped doing things that no government should be doing, there's still a whole lot of other things that the government is doing and is going to have to carry on doing or providing in some mechanism. We can argue about how it might be provided, yeah, but it's going to we're going to need to have security forces and armed forces and education and health, and so you've also got to work on how they do it better for the remaining piece, and that's where this starts to come in, because your analogy of the enlightened, if you were the actually you would probably do this, but there are plenty of other secretaries of state for the environment who have not done what you've described and walked down the corridor or walked across to Ofwat, who is the equivalent, to say, well, what about this leakage then? Um, and and so where we've got to get to, I think, is somewhere where the bits that can be made technocratic are made technocratic because some of them are just too long term and too politically nerdy and boring for politicians ever to spend. Even someone who would be as good a Secretary of State as you would, Mark, you just never get to it. There's loads of other things that would be further up your list of priorities, more urgent, particularly than that. So there are some technocratic things. How are you going to make those technocratic things happen reliably and in a politically boring but absolutely practically vital way? And that's where you do need some sort of arm's length body. But, and again, this comes back to it, that arm's length body has got to be powerfully accountable to you as the Secretary of State and to the relevant, select committee and Parliament and that sort of stuff. And there's got to be someone saying, hang on a second, we told them to do four things. They've only done one of them. Someone's got to, do the independent analysis and plonk it in front of you, so you know which questions to ask and you know where it's falling over. And at the moment, that's part of the stuff that's missing. Added to which, incidentally, they all have now, 15, 20, 25 different key performance indicators. I don't know about you, but I was always taught in business that if you've got more than about four key performance indicators, you can be absolutely certain that many of them aren't key.
Yeah.
And what happens if you
And you
have
can
that
also be
many?
certain that a good number of them are mutually exclusive. Yeah.
Yeah, and mutually incompatible. Absolutely right. So cut those down to sort of about four really important things and say this is the stuff which we're going to get independently evaluated. And if you're not doing it, then bad things are going to happen to you and your team. But if you are, then we'll erect small statues in your name, as it were.
Yeah.
Now, at that point, you as the Secretary of State know where to focus because you know where the problems are. You've got a clear view about what's going on. It's not just some sort of blizzard of facts and you can't pick out the reality from it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it means that the officials in charge of the technocratic bit know what they've got to do and it's consistent. So when you get reshuffled and someone much less good than you comes in as the next
Happens to
Secretary
me
of
all my
State,
life, John. Yeah.
but when that happens, they don't, those goals don't suddenly change. So they're constantly getting whipsawed around. If you do that, then you've still got political accountability, and it means that you can, if necessary, take that trip down the corridor you were talking about, and jump up and down and shout if you have to. And you can also hold people properly accountable, so that if they fail abjectly, it's clear. But also, if they succeed brilliantly, actually, why not celebrate that a bit? Why not be proud of someone? Because there are plenty of good officials, but they tend to get tarred with the brush of their less talented colleagues on the other side of the desk, or
Well,
on the
and they're
beach,
also
wherever it was that bloke was posting the stuff in the OBR,
yeah,
perhaps.
yeah, yeah. But well, I think we've also got the incentive structure wrong, right? I mean, you don't get much credit for stopping stupid things or repealing bad things. So every civil servant, at the senior level in policy is wanting to help pilot through a new bill to achieve something new and set up something new rather than repealing. There's a couple of questions that come in on sort of small state conservatism. An interesting one from Jeremy Brown. Surely small state conservatism means getting the state out of education altogether. Small state equals 100% private education, please. Even if we weren't willing to go quite that far, what does the Department for Education do other than Ofsted? What's it? Do we need a Department for Education? Even if there's a good number, a very large number, a preponderance of schools in the state sector, why does it need hundreds of bureaucrats in Whitehall? Well, probably not in Whitehall, hundreds of desks in Whitehall and hundreds of bureaucrats working from home. What the hell are they doing?
Yeah, well, really good question. I think there are a couple of things that you would want to keep. There may be a whole lot of other things that you don't want to carry on doing, but there's some really important things that they should be doing under any circumstance. So, if you end up with a multi-academy trust, yeah, that I don't know runs, let's say, 25 schools, and it's been doing really, really well, and suddenly, there's a change at the top or something goes wrong, and all of a sudden it starts to fail. Now, at that point, you've got to have somebody who's going to not just let them carry on failing, but who's going to turn up and say, no, this isn't good enough. We want to turn around and a rescue plan, and if you can't do that, then we're expecting the governors to find new leaders, to find new management. And if they can't do that, or they can't do it fast enough, then you may actually want to say, well, we're going to have to break this up. These 25 schools need to be under, into three different mats, or
Yeah,
taken
yeah.
over by other organisations. Those kind of things to intervene when problems occur and manage them properly and sort them out so that the children's education is not sort of harmed for any longer than is absolutely essential. You want to have a Department of Education doing that, and you want to have a Department of Education incidentally also dishing out the money and making sure that Ofsted is checking
Yeah.
that the quality standards are being followed so that parents can make intelligent choices about where they want to send their child. Those sorts of things you really want to have carrying on.
I
Now,
reckon I need a
whether or not,
staff of about 8 from what you've said so far.
yeah, well, what I can't tell you, but I think the underlying presumption of that question is there's probably an awful lot of other people who are not doing that. So there's certainly scope for the Great Repeal Bill, I think is what you're saying, Mark.
Okay. Um, and then Anne Rees asks, what does small state conservatism mean for policies such as migration? She reiterates my point: shrink the state. Are there areas of government that should be scrapped entirely, such as quangos that don't
Yeah.
have oversight? But isn't it a general problem for the government that, not just within departments, but the government is trying to do everything, and therefore isn't succeeding remotely well on the basics, like let's keep our borders secure and have a functioning justice system and proper policing, because it's trying to work out exactly how good Jimmy's music lesson needs to be at Key Stage 3 in a comprehensive school. So why don't we sort of, take the foot off the gas a bit on that and focus on the core-ish things that the
I mean,
government's supposed to get right.
I do want to know if the music or the maths or the English lesson at Key Stage 3 is rubbish, because at that point I want someone to take the teacher aside and fix it actually. But your point is right, and this comes back to your kind introduction about small state conservatives. A strong but small state. There are things that the state needs to do to keep us all safe, and that's defending our borders, law and order on the streets, etc., etc. But the problem with it is that, certainly on the centre right, we have all talked about wanting a smaller state for years and years and years, right? We haven't actually done it. And we haven't really done it for decades. And the difficulty as well is knowing how to deliver it. Because if you look around the world, what other things have been tried. So Doge in the States, huge hope attached to Doge Elon Musk, one of the most successful business leaders on the planet, leading Doge, everyone thought, wow, this is amazing. But in fact, it really hasn't had anything like the success that everyone expected, if anything at all. Um, Ditto, if you look at what's happening with some of the sort of UK equivalents of trying to try some of the reform-run councils have sort of said we're going to have our own local Doge and we're going to get rid of waste. And the problem with it is that if you turn up and sack everybody with a rainbow-coloured lanyard, that ain't going to get you very far. I mean, it may be a good thing to do on its own, but it isn't going to make a big difference. And so that's why we, as a political movement on the centre right, regardless of which party you happen to vote for and prefer, we all need to work out how you do small government so that you still have a strong state that does the things that a strong state still needs to do, keeping us safe, etc., etc., and which makes sure that rivers aren't full of sewage, etc., etc., but doesn't then have to carry on putting up your taxes and doesn't have a welfare state, which the welfare state's been going for 70 years. It costs you and I and taxpayers as a whole billions in benefits. So how come after 70 years and billions, how come poverty is still a thing? I
Yeah.
mean, as an index of long-term abject failure, we've dealt with inflation, we've dealt with all sorts of other things, we've dealt with all sorts of communicable diseases, almost wipe many of them out. How come poverty is still there and nobody expects to fix it ever?
Yeah. John, you've written a very good piece on this, which
absurd.
we'll link in the chat that I read
Yeah,
earlier today. Really interesting question. I mean, the numbers are jaw-dropping, isn't it? But welfare payments, by which I just mean transfer payments, not the
yeah,
NHS
yeah,
or education, just giving cash, taking cash
yeah,
from one cohort and giving it to another. It's going to be what, 400 billion pounds by the end of this parliament. So
yeah. And
that's
the and
£12,000 per household per year.
yeah,
That's what we're
and so
spending on transfer payments.
the problem with it is that um, because the way we think about poverty, we think about it as anyone under 60% of median income. It means you will never, ever, ever conquer poverty, because actually what that is, it means that your entire benefit system or certainly working age benefits as mainly, um, is aimed at redistribution
Yeah.
of money and wealth. It isn't aimed at solving poverty. Poverty is different from redistribution. It's different from money because if for example somebody is a chaotic drug addict and you increase their income through transfer payments through benefits from 58% of national income to 60% of national income, they count as being out of poverty, but all you've done is you've funded their next fix.
Yeah. Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
not dealing with the underlying causes. You're only bandaging symptoms. And we've
Yeah.
been bandaging symptoms for 70 years.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I just, it's immoral and it's hopeless, and it's endless. And we've
Yeah.
got to change what we're doing.
Yeah, and you make a number of good points in the article that if you that the banking crash led
Yeah,
to a reduction in poverty because although everybody got poorer, the rich got hit relatively harder.
yeah.
Probably on the 60% of medium income, the poverty's been eliminated in North Korea. I wouldn't be surprised, right? Because
Well,
median
and
income.
to use another example, just to illustrate the stupidity of it, if the 10 richest people in the country died and left all their money to Battersea Dogs Home, the dogs would feel great, but actually, and poverty would have gone down, but absolutely no human beings would be any better off at all.
Yeah.
How stupid is that?
Yeah. Now let's talk about the process in the Conservative Party because I've got a number of the audience wanting to move on to this. We've got a few questions about CPF. Chris Penny asks, where are we with policy renewal in relation to the reorganisation of the party announced by CCHQ? Ian Bocking asks, does Kemi and CCHQ actually take any notice of CPF? And Reese again asks, who decides the subjects looked at by CPF? And how much consideration is given to members' submissions? Just before we came on air, and I should have really looked it up, John, but I can remember it vividly. The party, so I'm not blaming this on CPF, when we're going to consult with the membership about policy, and just you wait, the consultation's going to start on Tuesday or whatever it was. And that
Mm.
Tuesday, I get an email asking for my opinions on various things. It was absolutely useless. They said it was about values, which was then going to feed into priorities, that was then going to feed into philosophy, that was then going to feed into policy, that was then going to feed into the manifesto. I mean, it was complete PR, in management speak. And I was asked things like, is the family very important to you? Quite important to you? Not very important to you? Is the nation important to you? Not very important to you? Is the prosperity important to you? And I didn't bother answering because my only answer would be all 10 or 12 things you've listed are all very important to me. Proof that the Conservative Party Central Office doesn't understand the concept of trade-offs either. But what's the CPS there for? Because I know some people cynically sort of suggest that members can get involved. They sort of put forward their ideas. They're sort of filed away somewhere. There's a kind of a nod that, thank you very much for your input. But does it really break through the steel
Yeah.
ring of the people who are developing policy in the next manifesto?
So the short answer is yes, quite a lot of the time, but not all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Is the simple answer to that. I mean, we have in the CPF we have a privileged position which other think tanks would give their eye teeth for, because if we come up with if we consult the CPF members about whichever the topic is, that gets synthesized and sort of pulled together from all around the country. You get groups meeting in pubs and in village halls and in people's front rooms and that sort of stuff. Um, and that gets pulled together, and then it genuinely does go to now shadow ministers and shadow cabinet ministers, and before it was actual government ministers and shadow and cabinet ministers, and to number 10. So and they look at it and they comment on it, um, and they sometimes agree with it and they sometimes don't. And my constant conversation with them is, look, even if you don't agree, that's your prerogative. But can you tell us why? And can you tell us which bits you do agree with? And actually, last time round at the last general election, I mean, for what I'm not sure that anyone was particularly interested in what was in the manifesto at all. But for the last two manifestos, we've had well over between a third and a half of the things in the manifesto have been included in CPF recommendations in advance. So, we can't claim sole ownership of them or sole authorship of them. No, absolutely not. But there's no doubt that we've had an influence and we get to speak truth to the very heart of power in the party. So yes, it does, but it's not it isn't that if CPF comes up with something, it automatically becomes party policy immediately afterwards. That wouldn't be fully democratic.
And okay, I'll row back my cynicism a little then. But are the sort of battles that you win. I mean, to what extent are they about grand vision? I don't know. We've got to completely reset the education system. Or to what extent are they, to go back to earlier in our conversation, someone who's worked out how to, reduce water leakage by 0.5% if we only go for this technical tweak in some regulation?
It's really interesting because um, occasionally we get journalists sniffing around trying to write. They've got this sort of pre-baked idea about the article they want to write that CPF is full of sort of crusty old colonels who are sort of harumphing in corners of pubs and are sort of have a particular worldview. Actually, uh, the CPF membership, because it's mainly party members, but there are also people who are of conservative views but aren't currently paying us up to the party. So providing you are of conservative views, then you can join. Um, and actually, we are pretty much representative of the people who vote Conservative as well. So, and that's a long-winded way of saying, therefore, what you get is a whole variety of different answers, some of them really big, sweeping, strategic things, others of them really quite small and detailed if you get a group that's really got the bit between their teeth about whatever it might be, water leakage or something like that. Um, and the point about it is that we can then try and reflect that back to the party leadership. You also had a question, I think, about how the questions are chosen. Yeah. And the answer is twofold. One is sometimes we get a minister or a shadow minister now coming to us and saying, I don't know the answer to this. It would be really helpful to have some thinking on it. And they can commission us to do something. Alternatively, they can say, I think the answer to a particular problem is this, but I want to do a sounding board with some people who I know are of naturally conservative voters. Could you please help us with that? So you get that, which is kind of a top-down thing. The other thing you also get, though, is just groups of conservatives coming together. Increasingly, we're trying to do this more online now as well. So you can get people who are particularly interested in tank procurement in the MOD who happen to live at opposite ends of the country. They can all get together online and come up with some quite detailed stuff. And there's a chunk of bottom up going on there as well. So it is, and the answer, I guess, to your question then is we get everything from the very, very detailed to the big sweeping vision and everything in between as a result of that, because that's what conservative voters think.
Interesting. And we've just, for the audience, we put a link in the chat to the CPF, so you can find out more about it there, get involved. I might take Simon Deer's question here, which is the most upvoted, and then ask you how I should be feeding into the CPF or PopCon in general. Simon asks, Kemi took the Conservative brand, off the market for a year, creating a vacuum that Reform has rushed in to fill. The post-conference membership blip has resumed its downward trend. At no point has she mentioned in public the need to alter radically the processes of government, which many of us believe is fundamental. Other than by adopting more reform policies, does she have a future post-May 2026? I suppose I want to bend that Simon's question a bit in with mine. If, which PopCon is here to agitate for, we think that the Conservative Party manifesto should include, as one of probably its top item, a great repeal bill, and we should enunciate most of the things that should be in that, because this was tried and failed at the start of the coalition government. There's a sort of general sense that some things should be repealed and then it was abandoned. How should we go about that? Because at the moment, although Kemi sort of talks about being an engineer and everything, that things aren't working too well, it's probably other front benchers on the Conservative front bench have articulated with more vigour the need for this sort of grand repeal rather than sort of repairing some holes in the roof. Robert Jenrick comes to mind, for example. So if we wanted to do that, how should PopCon or members of PopCon or the dozens of people on this call do it to try and raise that to CPF's attention and then to the shadow cabinet as a consequence?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways of doing it. It's a really, really good and important question, I think. So for anybody on this call who wants to get involved, sign up to CPF. You can do it via our website. It's free, and there'll either be a group near you or there'll be online events or whatever. And we're in the process of sort of rebooting a bit because there was a big downsizing, as you know, at CCHQ after the general election. And so we're having to sort of reorganize how we do things because we don't have any CCHQ staff. We're all volunteers, but that's happening, and we're sort of picking up speed again. So sign up, join up. Actually, the people on this call will be totally meat and drink for the sorts of things that we're after doing. For PopCons as a whole, so Mark, you or other of the PopCon leadership, you probably know, but the people to talk to would be people like James O'Brien MP and also Alex Burghardt MP, and Victoria Hewson, who's ex-IEA, and you will know very, very well as well. And I think they are already starting to ask some of the other centre-right think tanks of one kind or another to do work for them. So Onward, where I'm involved a bit as well, has been asked to do some stuff on housing, for example. So if you came across to any of those three and said, look, we'd love to do some stuff, can we help? If they don't bite your hand off, then come and tell me.
Okay,
Uh, I guess as well.
that's really good advice. Um, I just want to finish, I guess, by talking about the wider situation that the centre right finds itself in. I wrote an article in The Critic this month on. Actually, Ralph Godley asked how many people are members of CPF. Let me just. Do you know an answer to that?
We've got a mailing list of thick end of 20,000.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
The state of politics on the centre right. So the Conservatives get completely shellacked at the last election. You're unfortunately, in the 2/3 of our parliamentary representation that gets defeated at the polls, down to 121 seats at the election. What was it? Just over 24% of the vote, the worst share for the Conservatives since democracy began, or in the complete history of the party, actually. Forget when democracy began. And if anything, things have got worse since. So my sort of interpretation, showing I'm no sort of psephologist, was that July the 4th last year would be the bottom of the barrel, right? That a lot of people are angry. A good number of people on the centre right were going to withhold the vote from the Conservatives and vote Reform as a protest vote. Reform might win a few seats, but wouldn't win many. And then, as the full horrors of a Labour government became apparent, those who had gone off to vote Reform to signal their disgust at the Conservatives would drift back into the Conservative column. And I didn't expect the Labour government to unravel this quickly, but as it did unravel, the Conservatives would move very rapidly from 24 to 26 to 28 to 30 to 32, onwards and upwards. And if I had known in advance that the Labour Party was going to unravel this quickly, and all I'd known was that, I would be assuming that the Conservatives would be 10, 12, 15% ahead in the opinion polls now. Why are we in third place typically?
Yeah. So and that this comes to one of the questions which was you were reading out from the Q&A chat earlier on as well. So it's really interesting, isn't it? I think that Kemi has, since her conference speech, but also in her response to the budget a couple of days ago now, has really moved up a gear. But the difficulty is that for that first year after the general election defeat, people were still cross with the Conservatives. In fact, many people still are cross with the Conservatives even now. And what happened, and you've only got to look at the polls to see it, is that the Reform basically harvested an awful lot of that anger and the energy behind that anger, and so they took over. And it isn't that I think that people particularly are thinking that the Reform's ideas are, particularly always conservative. They're in favour of renationalisation, and they're in favour of repealing the two-child benefit cap and paying an awful lot more out in benefits, for example. So it isn't a question of these are a better, truer version of conservatism. It is we are still cross with the Conservatives. We aren't going to just flip back to them until we can flipping well see that they've earned our trust again, and it's too soon. And in the meantime, we want to carry on giving the establishment, which is both the two historically major parties, but a bunch of other stuff too. We want to carry on giving them a damn good kicking because we are really upset and really cross with the fact that nothing flipping works. And I kind of, they got a point. Nothing does work. That's why you and I have been talking about how to make bits of the state work better, and that's what a lot of our conversation's been about. Until somebody comes up with a really good set of alternatives which are believable and understandable and readily, credible, and aren't self-contradictory and don't imagine a magic money tree and all those other things. Until someone comes up with that, then people are still going to be angry because they're basically going to say, I don't think that any of you guys have got the first flipping clue about how to run a whelk stall, let alone the country.
Mhm.
Now, and that's what's been going on. It's been happening on the right and on the left. That's why you've seen a rise of the Greens, of they've decided to call themselves Your Party now, haven't they?
My God, if you're looking for
Pe-
someone to run a whelk stall, I wouldn't look over there. My God,
yeah,
that would
but
have been a right
indeed not.
shambles. Yep.
But that's why people are deserting the major parties
Yep.
in droves because they just don't believe anyone's got the answers. So now it isn't that even when parties like Reform sort of take over running a council, it isn't that suddenly those councils suddenly start to function really, really well. They've ended up having to put up council tax and do all sorts of things that they promised they wouldn't. And so I think that where we are now is we are still in a place of huge churn and change because people are still looking for a credible alternative. I think, I mean, personally, I hope, but that this is me being biased and party pre. I hope that Kemi, the new model Kemi, who's sort of suddenly got extra energy, extra certainty. She looks much more relaxed. She's got much more passion about her. Um, I hope that that is something that she's going to be able to carry on doing because it started at conference. It really took off, I think, in her response to the budget just a couple of days ago. And if she does that for 3, 6, 9 months, and we start rolling out policies where people go, yeah, okay, I can see why simpler lower taxes would be a possibility, and here's how you get there, for example. Um, then at that point, I think that the way is still open for a party to massively, massively rise in the polls, but it's only going to happen if you've got a credible set of answers. And until somebody does have a credible set of answers, all you're going to get is people still being angry with the blob of politicians, none of whom seem to know what on earth they're going to do to fix the problems that everybody can see day in, day out. Incidentally,
Let's
sorry,
just
one other point, the one politician, apart from perhaps from Kenny, on the left of centre, who has actually started to do a bit of that, is Shabana Mahmood with her stuff about trying to deal with stopping the boats. Now, I don't know if that's going to work, but it's the first time I've actually listened to someone going, "All right, you sound like you are starting to grapple with the right things." And I think it's absolutely right that we have said we're going to support her in this stuff. We would like her to go further, but I think we're going to support her in this stuff, and that is the right thing to do. Whether or not it's enough, but it's at least a step in the right direction.
Okay, and I'll echo if we. I know we've overrun. We can just have a few minutes of your time, John. My theory about what's going wrong. Well, I think a good number of things have obviously gone wrong. Not much has gone right for the Conservative Party in the last few years. And I've put a link in the chat to my article in the Critic magazine this month if people want to read that. Firstly, I think, and you're right that Kemi was terrific over the not just at the dispatch box in her television interviews as well
Yeah, yeah.
around the
If she
budget.
can carry on doing that, we're in
Different
a different
gravy.
game. Yeah,
But I don't think she has yet articulated an explanation for what went wrong in office, right? And when the Conservatives last needed to rebuild, and although not from such a low position as now, was when the Heath government was kicked out in 1974. And there was a complete change of management. Heath was kicked out as leader. Thatcher came in with Keith Joseph as a sort of philosophical and intellectual guru. And there was an explanation for what went wrong. And I'm worried that if the rallying cry is merely the Conservatives are under new management, that
yeah,
won't cut it, right? If I go to a restaurant and get chronic food poisoning, and a few weeks later, I'm wondering which restaurant to go again. If that restaurant just has a sign up saying we're under new management, that will not be enough to cut it for me. I need
yeah,
them to explain how I got food poisoning last time and how then I'm not going to get it this time.
yeah,
And to my mind, all of the great repeal stuff and the structure of government could form part of that. That we
yeah,
basically tried to run a market-leaning centre-right government on Blairite social democratic tram lines, and that was an error. And therefore the whole drift was bound to be to the left. That's what we got wrong. We did not fix the underlying fundamental structures of government
Yeah,
and
yeah.
concept, but that hasn't been articulated yet. So I think
So,
it's not that I want a mea culpa of total self-flagellation and just like, wondering exactly how many buses there are we can throw Liz Truss under. It's I want a coherent explanation of what we genuinely think we failed to deliver. Taxes up over 14 years, spending up, regulation up,
so
freedoms down. That hasn't happened yet. And then the second thing, which you sort of touch on, is a phenomenon. I think the Conservatives actually need to become something of an anti-establishment party. A much more democratic party. Not, Dorothy Roberts asks what's happening in central office that ensures that the members are able to select candidates that resonate with them, not imposed by central office. John Strafford, long-time campaigner on this. Why is the chairman of Conservative Policy Forum not elected by and accountable to the ordinary party members? That if anti-establishmentism is in the air, and if we are broadly agreed that the present system is broken and doesn't work, we should be an anti-establishment party. I don't want to suggest that things are quite as bad as they were in the Warsaw Pact, but centre-right conservatives in East Germany in the 1970s and early 1980s would have been anti-establishment. And I think if we stick to the system's, broken, but we think we've got a few tweaks to fix it.
no,
Us back
that
in
won't
charge
cut
of
it.
the Politburo, we will never, ever make headway. And
Yeah.
reform will deservedly knock the Conservatives completely off the pitch.
So I'd agree with a lot of that. The only bit I'd sort of uh, tweak a bit is it isn't enough to apologize for the mistakes of the past. You've got to show that you've got the answers to fix the mistakes going forward as well. You've got to be forward looking and say, here's the new program that's going to do the kind of things that we didn't get done last time. And people won't believe that you're worth voting for if you just say, oh, we were terrible, but we don't know what to do now. You've got to say, here's what we're going to do now. And inherent in that is the critique of the past because here's why it's different and here's why it's better. And if you do that, then it starts to work. But I agree with you. If you just look like you're tinkering around and you don't have that vision, then nobody is going to think you're worth it. They won't necessarily think that anybody else has got it either, incidentally. And it's just we're going to carry on getting more and more grumpy and angry as a democracy. But the moment somebody comes up with a cogent thing, and you are right as well, it's got to be small state because there's no money, right? There's the taxes at a historic high, debt is at a historic high. The good news about supply side reforms, the kind of structural reforms that we're talking about here, and which last happened under sort of in the Thatcher and in the earlier years of Major as well, is that they tend not to cost very much in terms of taxpayers' cash. But what they do is they take on vested interests. And your point about being anti-establishment is really important there. So if you're taking on the invested interest, saying, look, in the old days it was, we've talked about schools. Schools could carry on being rubbish for ages, and nothing really happened. And then we found a way of structurally, consistently, year in, year out, putting pressure on the bad ones and replacing the management and whatever it is, so they got better. That was taking on a vested interest which no one thought could be dealt with. So why aren't we doing that with the rail unions? Why aren't we doing that with all these other vested interests? If we can do that, not only have we got a prospectus that says here's why, here's the stuff we didn't do last time which needs to be fixed, but we're also anti-establishment at the same time.
So, and do you think the Conservative Party needs to be a bit better at the vision thing? I mean, my audit of the strengths and weaknesses of the Conservatives vis-a-vis reform is that Nigel Farage and reform have got a narrative, right? It's basically Britain is broken, Britain is biased, Britain is geared against the ordinary Brit in virtually every corner of the country that you look in. And we're going to fix that. We're going to take on the people who make it that way, get rid of them, and to almost misquote Starmer, return government to the service of the ordinary British people. Right now, reform might not be anything like so strong in having a 200-page peer-reviewed document on exactly how they're going to leave the ECHR, but they've been incredibly strong that, the ECHR's in the way, we're going to get out. I mean, haven't worked out exactly how we'll get out, don't know exactly when we trigger it, haven't yet got 110 KCs working on it. But if you want the broad picture of what we want, there it is. Whereas there's a danger that the Conservatives are just becoming reform's think tank, isn't there? That they say we'll leave ECHR, Kemi commissions for 6 months some top lawyer to write the document. To which Farage says, "Oh, great, thanks. You've just given me my roadmap."
Yeah. So the and I still think you're right that while Kemi was spending her first year doing the bottom up stuff, Farage was very, very good at doing the sort of the big overarching vision. So they got a lead on that at the moment. Yeah. Um, what I'm hoping we're going to see now from the new model, Kemi, if I can put it that way, is not just the passion that we've seen of late continuing, which is essential, um, and the relaxed, hard-hitting style, which is also essential. But at that point, if we then start coming up with the solutions that genuinely will fix it, as opposed to just getting angry about something, people don't want politicians who are going to rage against the machine. They want politicians who know how to fix the machine as well. Yeah, it isn't enough to do one; you've got to do both. And at that point, if she's got that energy and passion, and she's got the answers, at that point, I think that then is a much it's a quite an unequal fight actually, because then we've got both parts of the equation. But we are catching up. We've got ground to catch up because reform didn't have to come up with the detailed answers in that first year. They just had to be angry and have a vision, and they did both of those very well.
John, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thanks everybody for joining us. We had a huge amount to cover. I hope I've got a fair range of questions in. Our next pop conversation will be on Tuesday, the 16th of December at 7 p.m. with the former Director General of UK Border Force, Tony Smith, discussing Britain's leaky borders, what the real solutions are to make Britain secure. Full details and a link to registration will be in this Friday's PopCon newsletter. If you don't get our newsletter, you probably do, otherwise you probably wouldn't have known about this call this evening. But if you don't, go to popularconservatism.com, sign up, encourage your friends to do so as well. We're ecumenical, conservatives, reformers, independent-minded variants of each. Those who are neither, but are broadly on our side of the argument, are all welcome. I've really enjoyed our conversation, John. Let's catch up again soon. We covered a lot of ground, and perhaps, just perhaps, you have paved the way for a resuscitation of conservatism and the Conservative Party. So for that, many, many thanks indeed. Thanks everybody for joining us. Sorry I couldn't get through as many questions as I wanted to. You always spam me with loads of them, but I hope it was a good cross section. Look forward to seeing you again when we discuss borders with Tony Smith. Take care. Have a good one. Over and out.
Thank you very much. It's great.